Welcome. I'm Shannon Gibson. I'm the Dean of the Malley College of Business, and I appreciate you being part of our third annual Business of Flight Week. We use Business of Flight Week in our college to bring in as many different people to talk about the varied facets of aviation business and aerospace business as humanly possible, because the idea is to expose all of you to all the different career opportunities that exist and how they intermingle, because none of these stand solo. And today I am thrilled to welcome a group of executives from the Aviation and Aerospace Insurance Agency. This actual group was put together by Bill Kingsley of AssuredPartners, and we're going to hand it off to him and let them have the floor. So let's give them a warm welcome, please.
Hey, I'm Bill. I work for AssuredPartners Aerospace. We're probably the largest general aviation insurance broker in the United States. We don't do airlines, we don't do the space shots, but I think we're the broker. So we're the equivalent of the corner office that somebody says, hey, I insure life and home and autos and that stuff. So we just do that, except all we do is aviation. We do about 40,000 owner-flown aircraft and some big accounts. Embry-Riddle is one of my accounts. Some other big complex accounts around the country, flight schools, charter operators, that type of stuff, manufacturers. So, and I will tell you, it's sort of a rhetorical question. There's only one thing you can't fly an airplane without: insurance. Absolutely can't fly without insurance. So you can get rid of a lot of things, including pilots and fuel and engines, but you can't get rid of insurance. So ups and downs, our industry has them, but you got to buy it every year. So it's a pretty steady, pretty good industry to be in. Natalie works for us, and I'll let her introduce herself, and we'll go around down the line.
Yes, so I'm Natalie. I actually graduated from here in December of 2021 with a degree in business administration, and met Bill at an event like this actually, and then joined in January after I graduated. So I've been with them for about a year. Been really just learning a lot. There's so much to learn because it's so unique, and there's just so many different types of risks and how to handle stuff like that. So I've been really taking everything in for a year and just got my own accounts in January, and I can really enjoy that process. I work out at the Columbia office, so we deal with more mid-market stuff, smaller charter operations, and smaller pleasure business owner-flown risks. But it's been really fun so far.
Mark is with Global Aerospace.
So I'm Mark with Global. I've been there for about 4 years. I kind of had a bit of a curvy road to how I got into underwriting, but I'm working out of the New Jersey office out of Morris Plains. And like I said, I've been there 4 years working on U.S. general aviation and Latin accounts as well.
I'm Jason Hendricks with Global Aerospace out of Dallas office, class of '98, Daytona. And I came to Embry-Riddle from the military. And then once I graduated Riddle, interviewed with a aviation insurance underwriting company, and that's how I wound up in Dallas. I had an interview down here, and then 25 years, all I've been doing is aviation insurance. Global Aerospace, in a nutshell, does everything from space down to privately owned aircraft, so airlines, manufacturers' products, general aviation. We do a little bit of everything.
One thing Jason didn't say it. Jason's the lead underwriter for Embry-Riddle. So as I'm the broker, he's the underwriter. I think of it as two sides of the same coin. Takes both of us. He accepts the risk, and I'm the guy that sells the risk and manages it, and then he's the one that accepts it and prices it. So we have to work together, and like, other than Natalie, they're all underwriters. But Jason's been on my side, and Debbie's been on my side. Sometimes, and I've been an underwriter, so sometimes in your career, you're going to go back and forth. And it's really two sides of the same coin. Lamont
Roseman, QBE Insurance. I actually am class of 2005. See some familiar faces here. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm responsible for our general aviation portfolio as well as our technical underwriting. So I'll go into more detail.
I'm Debbie Fanjoy, and I'm with American International Group, AIG, based in Chicago. And I started off my career with a passion for aviation and armed with my Embry-Riddle degree. So I was an aeronautical science graduate, and I spent my career on the underwriting and broking side of the business. And we do cover as well the full facet of variety of aviation insurances. AIG is a big multi-line insurer, global insurer of all sorts of offerings for risk and insurance.
So Debbie, let's start with you.
Hey.
What's an average day for you?
Average day, okay, well, it could be anything. It's really dynamic. I mean, I think probably a lot of people that sit here that don't do insurance think about insurance policies and certificates of insurance and these kinds of things. And we certainly, that is, the words in the paper and the insurance policies are critical and they're dynamic. And it's every day is different. So whether I'm in the office and working on that or out with clients, I spend a lot of time. If you back up the chain before you ever get to an insurance policy, you're getting to know the client. And it's all about risk and what sort of risks do we need to cover as the broker and the underwriter, what do we need to address? And so you need to learn about that client. So some of my favorite days are spent out either on airports, at manufacturing sites, with airlines, understanding their emergency preparedness and different aspects of their operations. So it really runs the gamut.
Mom, what's your day like?
So mine's similar to today. I would say mine is both internal and external. So managing the general aviation portfolio is interacting with people like Bill, the brokers, and Natalie. And that's really just arming our underwriters with the tools that they need to be able to do their job successfully. This goes as far as going out and writing new business, as well as retaining what we currently already have. I'm also responsible for our technical underwriting, and I would call that more on the internal side of the house, which is product development, which is looking at the policy forms, policy language, and any other kind of strategies that we're trying to develop internally, as well as the operations side, which would be the policy processing. A lot of that is done both onshore and offshore these days, so you do have a component where you're dealing with our offshore colleagues are based actually out in the Philippines. So it can be a rather long day. You're dealing with a lot of different time zones. So, but it does help it not become mundane.
Jason, I don't even want to ask what you do. Jason spends his life on airplanes.
Well, part of that is you continue to learn about your client even when you write it. Right? Embry-Riddle doesn't stay the same every year, right? So a large part of the day is realizing the change that comes across with your current clientele. And like Lamont mentioned, anything new that comes over, it requires a lot of work and personal commitment and study, not just to speed through, because you're a fiduciary of the company. You're looking at what might be the best fit, or what challenges can you work around, and how do you approach the broker with that. So a typical day for me involves also a little bit of what Lamont said about, we usually don't do anything in a vacuum. I can call Mark and say, hey, what do you think? I'm going to send you this over Teams or whatever. And we'll get into that with technology development, Teams, and being able to advance that within business. But a lot of that is dialoguing with our colleagues to help gain that support of understanding. If I don't know it, then they will. So a lot of that, my day is involved with liaising with my colleagues. And a large part of my day also is I look after the West region, so Dallas, LA, Chicago, and I'm in between those offices and different client bases there. So it's a decent amount of time on American Airlines.
Mark?
So yeah, I guess I'm just going to keep building on what has been said already before. I'm not going to touch on the policy wording because I don't want anyone's eyes to glaze over while we're talking about that real technical stuff. But I would say another piece of the puzzle of kind of the daily life is taking a look at at different applications, different pilot questionnaires. And with that sort of thing, you can then liaise with the brokers, kind of really flesh out what the actual risk is, what the actual exposure is all about, and you really get to the bottom of what you're trying to find out. So it's different every day, which is a great part of the job, and obviously the policy wording is in the background always. That is the most important piece. But to get there, you have to do a bunch of this other work in the meantime. So. That's what I'll kind of build on there.
I'm going to let Natalie talk for one moment. We gather the information and then we present it to the underwriting community. And then they make decisions on that. And then we convey it back as the broker, we kind of convey it back, or we figure out which company or which set of companies might make the best solution for our client. So Natalie is learning the brokerage side.
Yes, like you said, I'm definitely still learning. I have smaller, more simple accounts than what he works on per se, but for my day-to-day, I'm getting information and getting all the information from the client, getting to know them as best I can and their operations inside and out, so that I can present that to all the different underwriters and, like he said, find the carrier that's going to offer the best solution for our client. That's certainly in simple terms, and then on the other side of it, there's the day-to-day service work for policies that you already have in force, adding aircraft, adding additional insureds, and managing their policies to make sure that everything's covered and changes are covered. So, yeah.
A lot of management at Natalie's level. And then once it gets to my level, I'm not so much doing the paper pushing, and unfortunately there still is some paper push, but I'm managing the client expectations, how we structure policies, and I'm handling some of the more difficult questions that Natalie's capable of answering, but sometimes if you have gray hair, it's an easier answer if they want to hear from me, not her. So that's sort of what I do. I like bigger, complex accounts. You ever heard the saying, you owe the bank $1,000, you're screwed, you owe the bank $10 million, they're screwed? Well, $1 million policy, their answer is a little different when they've got $1 million policy than when it's $1,000 policy. So it's sometimes easier, the bigger the account, sometimes it's easier for somebody like me to manage. And it's a little different relationship on bigger stuff. And to me, that's fun. So we talked about what's fun. What's something that's not so fun in this industry? Because all industries have challenges. So, Jason, I'm going to start with you. Tell me something that you don't like about this industry. Because we all have problems. All industries.
We do, and there's headwinds with within our industry that sometimes can challenge even the best relationships from underwriter to broker, because it is a relationship, and you develop these and cultivate them over years. And Bill mentioned it, it's a lot of fun. You spend a lot of time on the phone. It's a small industry. You really enjoy working with the different brokers and clients. But some of the challenge can become when there's a shift in any sort of driver for the market, and you have to put up something fairly challenging to someone you've known for years, and then they come back and go, this is Jason I'm talking to, right? You know, not somebody just vomiting out an optic. So that is probably one of the more challenging parts of the job. But I will say that makes me a greater professional when we work through those and we don't give up. And we do always find a way to get through those scenarios. That's probably one of the biggest challenges from my perspective within.
Debbie, what's one of your big challenges in the industry?
So I was thinking this as Jason was speaking. It's a little different twist on the same topic, though, is the things that you can control and the things you can't. So, I love, all the elements of the job, how we, kind of line up our portfolio, how we evaluate risk, how we price risk, all those things. But there can be things not only about a specific risk, but on macro level that are, whether they're around, inflation even is something that kind of comes out in our current times. Cost elements that kind of come into our insurance carrier side and pricing elements that are ultimately going to affect all of our insureds. Things like reinsurance, things like, when you hear about insurance, probably for aviation perspective, it's probably something really big. We don't have a real high frequency of claims. Aviation inherently is quite well done, professional, safe. There's a lot of regulation. There's a lot of elements that go into the insurance aspect that really create a good experience. But the big things that happen and the things that are very visible, those things might not be one individual insured that Bill's working on, a big or a small insured, but they'll be impacted as well, potentially, if it's a big enough event that's kind of impacted our industry. So So you think about, large events, large accidents, groundings, things like that. So it can be the macro things that are a little bit frustrating because they kind of come into our plan and they say, okay, here are all the things I wanted to achieve. Here's the things that the broker and the client want to achieve. And yet we have to contend with some of these other macro level.
Natalie is throwing it at you. What's the challenge?
I actually think my answer perfectly pairs with hers. One thing that I found to be really difficult, especially being new and getting my own accounts. I'm new onto this account, and now we're seeing rate increases with the Boeing claims and the Russian confiscation and setting aside money for stuff like that. Now you're seeing rate increases, and there's a new face on your account, and you're having to explain why their tiny little aircraft is affected by these giant claims, and you're new. And I think that could be incredibly difficult, so managing that conversation, and that conversation is different with every owner too. So trying to figure out the best way to explain it for them in a way that makes sense to them while also introducing yourself can be difficult right now.
So to give you a little background, what we're kind of talking about, two big drivers in our world right now. The Boeing MAX grounding and the claims involved that, it's going to run about $3.5 billion, right? $3.5 billion. The total worldwide premium for all aviation, worldwide, everything, every airplane, every 172, every Boeing, everything, space shots, everything, $6 billion, so $3.5 billion on one claim. The Russian confiscation of 400 Western aircraft, the Boeings, the Airbuses that were leased to Russia. We said after the invasion of Ukraine, we want those aircraft back. Russia confiscated them, nationalized them, something. The lawyers are figuring out the exact wording. That claim could be as much as $8.5 billion to $20 billion, depending on how it's paid out. So $6 billion in, $3.5 billion there, $8 to $20 billion, and the little claims, all the other aircraft accidents you hear about, they're still happening. So there's some macro challenges in our industry right now, and pricing is going up fairly substantially, which, as a broker, because you're the front line, is not fun. Because they're doing everything right, they haven't had claims. Congratulations, you get a 25% increase. That's a fun conversation. Lamont?
Yeah, I guess I'll go a little, not so in the weeds, but I would probably say overall, just for insurance in general, it's the technology. We're good at insurance, but we're not the best at technology. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest challenges we have. Another thing I would say that's kind of related to that is just pulling information together. There's only, I would say, I think there's 20 aviation insurers in the US at least. And we're not good at sharing information, and we really can't legally share information. There's a small enough pond. If we were to have the ability to do that, we'd be so much better at our jobs, and we could explain a lot easier to our clients and to brokers alike why their insurance is going up. But because we don't share information, we don't really talk to one another on the record, I should say, about how things are being done or what we're doing on particular renewals. So I would say that piece of it and the technology piece is it'll build a lot of character within you.
And Mark, I won't forget about you. From your perspective, what you do, what's the challenge?
I think that I'm thinking about this question a little bit differently. I'm thinking about it as like a new person in the industry who just started out a couple years back. When I first started, I did not go to Embry-Riddle like everyone here did. So I didn't have aviation, and I didn't have insurance background at all. So when you're first learning that, it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose, really. That's like the saying that I think I heard probably 1,000 times when I first started. So I found it a little bit difficult to get my hands wrapped around everything. And I don't know if there's an easy solution for that other than just be patient and be willing to learn. But as a person who was just starting and I didn't have that background, I majored in economics at Loyola University of Maryland. So, I could tie it into insurance easily enough, but the aviation piece was all new to me. So it can get intimidating, it can be frustrating, sitting here with these folks and having to hear them talk, and you're saying, I have no idea what is going on. So that part can be a little bit more difficult, but I think the solution there is to just kind of stay on it. And it really starts to click the more you work, and the more you trust kind of your colleagues to help you through it.
I'll tell you, one of the challenges, you've heard me say it, you've all heard me say it before. No one sitting out there wants to hear this, but I'm going to tell you, you're pretty well worthless to us the first year. You're a drag on the system. I'm sorry as I can be. You come out with a 4-year degree and a lot of money spent here, and you want to go set the world on fire. And I'm just going to tell you, you kill me the first year response. You really kill me. But we have to put so much time and effort into training you. The second year, which is what Natalie's kind of hitting, you kind of break even. About your third year in the industry, you start adding value. So it really doesn't matter what level you come in with, because no one's sitting in here with, you need 3 things. You need a business background, you need an insurance background, you need an aviation background. And yes, you're sitting at an aviation university with a business background, but I mean, if you can tell me the difference between a 414 and a 421 and what a 425 is, they're all Cessnas, and know what they are, and that's how to underwrite. That's the level of aviation experience you sort of need. You know, all the difference between a King Air 90, a 200, a 350, all those differences is what a good underwriter knows, and it just takes a long time to absorb that. And that's the challenge in this industry, to frankly find somebody who wants to put the kind of effort it takes to learn. Because if you quit after a couple of years, you kill us. You absolutely kill us. But that's the challenge, I think, is to find the right people in the industry. So, does anybody agree on that? Am I wrong on my assessment? I want to hear from you all.
I can speak to that because I work for the same company. And I just finished my first year, and I can say, like, speaking like what he said, it's incredibly challenging, like your first year, because you are ready to like get after it. And you can't really, because you don't know anything. Well, I mean, you might know something. You know how to email, you know how to communicate, you know how to talk aviation, but like you don't know anything about insurance. And feeling confident talking to chief pilots or even underwriters who have been doing it for a long time is extremely intimidating. And then you just have, like, there's no training manual. Like, you just have to take it all in from what's around you and learn from those who are in your office, and they also have to be willing to help you, and I've been lucky with that everybody's put time and energy into me. So I think that I'm on the right foot now going into the second year, and I've got my own accounts and I feel like I'm doing well, but that first year it is certainly challenging.
I'll say, just echoing that, Natalie, from my standpoint, when I first started, the first year on the phone, anytime I picked up the phone, I was just, nobody, please don't ask me a question. Just please don't ask me anything. Just say, hey, add this aircraft or change this named insured or address or whatever. I could do that, but please don't ask me a technical question. But those were the challenges that you get that first year, because they're going to ask. And that was really a struggle the first 12 to 18 months.
To tell you how bad it was with me, I had a fraternity brother I've got a couple of degrees from Riddle here. One of my other fraternity brothers worked for a competing company as an underwriter. I can't tell you how many times I would pick up the phone my first year and call him and say, what am I supposed to do? And he would help me underwrite using my company rules, which were totally different than his company. He would say, well, my company, we wouldn't do this to the car. We wouldn't do this, but you all can do this. This is how you do it. So I would call my competitor to find out how to do my job.
And I'll just add real quick, to make matters even worse these days, is just with everything being virtual in the pandemic, and a lot of people still aren't going into office. So can you imagine someone like Natalie trying to learn her job over a computer and meetings? And, I mean, it's you don't have that one-on-one interaction, and I really think it messes up the learning curve. So kudos to those people that came around you.
It's a different experience, for sure.
Lord.
You get good at, finding ways to exit the conversation and say, I'll get back to you on that. But I would say that there are a few things. When I first started out, I was sort of looking up. I had the aviation bit down, but I had zero insurance. And I wasn't convinced insurance was the path for me. And I thought, well, we'll see what this looks like. And I have never looked back. Every day is still learning. Like, I'm still, the more dynamic and complex the account is, the more room you have to grow and learn on it, but I still find every day. But there were a few things. There's some insurance certifications. If you're just getting out of school and you're getting ready to negotiate with people that have maybe decades of experience on the other side of the table, Like there are programs, certifications and things that you can do on the insurance side. I actually found it really, really helpful, and I was still in really good form from having been at school to go right into some continuous learning stuff. So there's certifications, there is a designation that's aviation insurance specific, if you can believe that. You have to have a bit of experience, and there's some goalposts around what you need to do education-wise, but there are some things that you can do to support, but so much of it's on the job, learning, which I think is why I've never looked back, is because every day was different.
So, bad deals, tell us, every industry also has good deals. So, I mean, name something that was a good deal, because I've had a couple of really fun days in this industry that I got to do some things that were pretty incredible. And so everyone's had them, or things that they like. Jason?
Oh, well, it's going to sound completely like we were just goofing off and having fun, but there's a point to this, right? So we participate on Papillon helicopters, right? It's a very complex placement, and it requires a lot of insurers to do this placement. No one insurer can just handle all the risk. So we go out to do a risk visit, and that involved flying in Grand Canyon Airways on one of the caravans, then flying in an EC-130, or sorry, Airbus now, on top of a, I don't know, what do you call it, a view? Like a tower of rock. And so here we are going, oh, this is a lot of fun, and it was a great day, but this is what they do every day, right? So everything from the passenger briefing, when we got into the caravan, all the way until we got into the helicopter, went on top of this thing in Page, Arizona, came back down. To me, it was fun and great, but I also took away from that a lot of the risk control they do every day as operators of these helicopter tours. But I got back to the hotel that night, and I'm like, I can't believe I got to do this. I got to, fly in a caravan right over the Grand Canyon, land in Page, and get in a helicopter and land on this top of this view. And it was tremendous, but there was value to that. That's part of one of the better days I've had in the past few
Debbie?
years.
I'm thinking about the emerging technologies. So I love learning about additive manufacturing, the electric platforms of today. Which ones will be the ones that really, sort of power urban mobility? I love thinking about those things from a risk standpoint, and there's, a lot of different viewpoints. Even for some of the companies that are coming out with the electric platforms, they might be companies that are really proven in other areas. And so you're looking at it from a risk standpoint, trying to probe into some other things that might not, that are just application of technologies. Or you might have brand new companies that are taking executives and engineers from other proven platforms, and they're now going about how well financed are they? What does their platform look like? Is it going to be piloted or remotely piloted? What are the payload considerations? And what are some of the risk profile elements? I think these next many years are going to be really interesting for the emerging technologies. So I love looking at that stuff and thinking about it from a risk standpoint.
Natalie, have you had any good deals first year?
I'm going to tackle this question from a different perspective of being like a new hire and recent grad, and like just my first year learning a lot. One thing I enjoyed, and felt like it was like a nice win for me, was my first year I basically worked accounts with someone else and did more of like the processing work just to figure out how to work our systems, how to do it. But as I started to do that more, I would take on more of the getting to know the client and kind of figuring out their operations. And I always felt good when I figured out something about what they were doing that wasn't in their policy, and I was like, oh, we can add this, and it wasn't in there prior. And so that always gave me like a boost of confidence that I was learning something. And so that was a good win for me when that would happen throughout my first year.
Mark, what about you?
I think I would say one point going hand in hand with what Deb was saying before, aviation pretty much is innovation at its core, right? So you're kind of at the forefront of all the new developments. So that's cool to see in your day-to-day. The other thing that I would say is a kind of a fun part of the job is just going to visit clients, going to see flight departments, speaking with chief pilots. You get to see the operation firsthand. You don't have to look at it through the lens of a piece of paper application. They'll explain it to you right there in person. So that face-to-face interaction, getting to walk the ground, see the hangar, see the plane, is really valuable when you're first learning. And I think it's usually a great experience even when you're more experienced. So that's what I would say.
Well, Mom, what's a good deal that you've had?
I had to stick with the travel. I love getting in front of the clients, and I love getting in front of the clients like to show off their operations. That's when they get to do the fun stuff. So kind of like what Jason did, I was able to do a helicopter tour. Like this client uses their helicopters in the down season to do wine tours. They took us to all these different vineyards in Oregon. So that was really cool. And then on the flip side is that I would say, prior to being at QE, I was at a international global company, and I had the opportunity of going to Lloyd's in London and actually seeing how they do business out there. So it was really cool to be able to kind of tour that facility as well. So it's opened up a lot of doors I probably wouldn't have been able to open on my own.
And I'll tell you, here's the thing that I really love about this industry. We deal with really cool people. I mean, point blank. You don't get to buy a jet, a multi-million-dollar jet, unless you've done fairly well in life. Okay, we're dealing with 0.01%. The other thing is, I basically deal with CEOs and CFOs. You're dealing with the top people, and I tend to find out things sometimes about companies, ways they're heading, frankly, even sometimes before their employees find out, or certainly before the public finds out, because they're wanting to make sure that our insurance or their insurance is set up to handle which way they're going in the future. One of the deals, in fact, I shared it with, Jason was on it, is I'm looking at his name, Mr. David O'Malley. For those who don't know, he's a heck of a stick. He's got 10,000 plus hours, 10 maybe as much as 15,000 plus hours flying his own jets around. He has a beautiful, beautiful jet. And last fall, Jason and I had the privilege of, he took us flying his jet. And Jason set up the jump seat. Poor me, I had to sit in the back acting like I was an executive for 30 minutes, but the privilege of hanging out with some of these people and hearing about their lives and hearing about their flying. I mean, Mr. O'Malley has done extremely well in life, and to be around him and others like him is frankly, I think, is a privilege. And that's one of the things I love about my job in this industry is we hang with some pretty cool people, and you get some good deals. I've been to London. It's way cool. Now, you don't get to go flying with David O'Malley every day of your life. You don't get, there's a lot of paper pushing, I'll be the first to admit that, but there's some pretty cool deals. 5 years from now, where's our industry going to be, Debbie?
Oh goodness. So one of the things that we were giving some view to is sort of the privatization, space flight, and looking at manned space again, and what do some of those risks look like? We touched on the other aspects of some of the emerging technologies, but if you want to think about what does the insurance product look like, I think our technologies are frustrating, but they're improving. I think we'll see that they're always going to be complemented by the human aspect of decision making and evaluating risk. I don't think that we've found a way to look at what aviation is at its core to put that into a model. Certainly you can put values and you can put limits of liability, things like that into numbers, but the risk assessment piece of it is going to be guided by individuals. I think we'll be surrounded by better tools. I think we'll bring up the professionalism from the standpoint of having better tools around us, allowing us to hopefully be more in touch with the clients and on a direct basis, because I think that's the thing that we all crave and we all find is the most intriguing and the most where we're needed the most probably. So I think if you can, sort of take down the less glamorous parts of the job and hopefully bring up some of the more glamorous parts of the job by virtue of having better tools around us, I'm pretty optimistic. We're starting to see AI and some other things that are coming into what does that look like in sort of complementing underwriting. How do we use artificial intelligence in our business? All of our clients are so sophisticated, and we need to bring the insurance business forward.
Yeah, we're a few years behind on technology. Point blank, all of us. Natalie, you're the youngest person in the industry. Where's it going to be in 5-10 years?
I'm still learning so much about it. I'm still figuring out where it is now, honestly. So it's kind of a tough question for me to answer, but what I can say is there's a lot of opportunity for young people. And obviously everyone is hiring. I would say that insurance in general is in an industry that even women were the last to join, and I just think it's kind of ready for improvement in terms of the people who are joining, just like for opportunity and everything. And so I'm really excited for more and more young people to join. There's like 10 people in our office, and when I joined, I think I've decreased the average age by a large amount. And so then we had another girl join out of USC, and that was just really exciting to have people around you to learn together with. And so I think as we see more and more people join, it'll be really exciting to have that.
Lamont, where do you think we'll be in 5 to 10 years?
I'm with that. I definitely think that, that you see it now that we're becoming more data driven, more data analytics as far as our approach to the business. And I think 5 years from now, we'll have a lot more information that we'll be able to harness and to make decisions. But I definitely do see more things on a data basis, AI basis. And I also agree with what Natalie's saying as well. There's a big transition with people that have been in this industry for 30 or 40 years that are retiring now to where Natalie is. So there's a big gap in there, kind of where the rest of us fall, so to speak. So we're looking for an infusion of new talent, and it's just really hard to come by, especially with the way pilots are being sucked up these days. So I'd like to see that, insurance will always be here, as Bill mentioned. I do think there will always be pilots. I just don't know if we'll need as many pilots flying the airplanes as we see now.
Mark, I'll ask you. You're in the home office, so let's see what the home office thinks.
Home office, okay, there's a lot of pressure. I think that, like Lamont and Debbie were talking about before, insurance isn't going anywhere, and I don't think that there's a way to just plug in a risk profile and get a premium at this point. So I don't think we are going anywhere either, which is nice to know, I think, for quite a while, and even past 5 years. So that's kind of some nice security in that sense. But there's so much innovation going on. I think the big question is probably autonomous, like flight and stuff like that, where I think I'm interested in. But I think it is good to know that we can stick around. We've got a place to be for quite a while.
I want to end with Jason on this question because I know for a fact that Jason is on the team that's looking at the future within Global. So Jason, spit it out. Where are you heading?
So a few things that help develop the future here for us are the cost of things, right? So Bill was talking about corporate aircraft, the new Airbus coming out, the new 7500s, the new Gulfstreams. We're all talking like 75, 80 million for a single aircraft, right? Couple on top of that, limits of liability have traditionally grown, so these aircraft will carry 500, 750 million each, right? So when you look at the numbers Bill was talking about earlier, 6 billion of capital in the market at any given time, every aircraft flying out there doesn't have an aggregate limit, it has a per occurrence limit. So if something happened where you have a bad year, the limit's up there. So what I'm interested in 5 years is how we change that face of reinsurance and be more predictable as where we are now, where we're reacting to losses like Boeing and like Russia, Ukraine. How do we develop that forecast and change it ahead of time so we can hedge against what's coming with higher limits, higher hull values? Also from the aircraft use category, at Embry-Riddle, everything's two crew. You're flying with somebody in the back and somebody up front, an instructor. And the private aircraft industry, more and more aircraft are becoming single pilot motivated. Lattice is, PC-24, they advertise it as, single pilot. The aviation industry might not necessarily agree with that, but there are a lot of changes coming from making the flat deck more user-friendly and less workload. So I think in 5 years we have to develop strategies on how we stay ahead of that in our formation of risk mitigation and management.
That question that he was talking about, the flight deck technology makes it better. That's been exactly what Mr. O'Malley, that's why we were flying with him, because he was wanting to show us that, to convince him that he was a good pilot and that the technology he had surrounding him in his aircraft made it a good risk. And for Mr. O'Malley to crank up the airplane and take us for, I don't know, an hour, wasn't cheap, I'm sure, but it was worth it to him to show him how easy technology makes this aircraft fly. I'll sort of end with this. From about 2005 to probably around 2019, our industry pricing went down. And when I say pricing went down in 2005, say the price was $1,000 just for fun. In 2016, 17, 18, that same risk might have been worth $400. So we lost 60% on some of the premiums, 60% down from what it was at a high. In 2004, 2005, it was too high. In 2019, it was too low. The challenge is your cost basis can only be a percentage of the total income. As brokers, we make commission. So if I sell you a $1,000 policy, I'll make 15%, I'll make $150. $400 policy, I'll make $60. So what happened? Well, one of the things we did as an industry is we cut costs. And frankly, we stopped hiring. Lamont, you got in 2000 and...
no, 2006.
How
Sorry.
many people did we hire after you in the industry? And there's a whole, not very many is the answer.
Yeah.
There's a whole 10, 15-year period of time when we frankly, as an industry, we didn't hire a lot. And now it's coming back to bite us. I'm the old guy. My days are numbered. I'll be the first to admit that. I'm looking forward to it. Okay? She's got a ways to go. But the challenge is, as an industry, we've got to do a tremendous amount of training to bring our young people up. Because frankly, we lost a whole generation, maybe a generation and a half of talent, because the pricing in my industry was not sufficient to allow us to hire people and train people. And that's probably, to me, the biggest challenge in this industry is finding the right people, bringing them in, training them, and making them useful. So, a question to you all, please ask questions. We'd love to, if anybody's got questions, we'd love to hear them.
I have a question for the group. How many people are currently is anybody in Aerosci as we speak? So these are all business. Wow. So no desire to become pilots?
That's Jack.
I started out in the Aerosci program and graduated with a business degree.
He needs an internship too, by the way.
I have 2 degrees in air science, so I was a pilot. And here. Yes.
So, is anyone involved in ensuring space activity in any capacity right now?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that?
What's that?
Can you elaborate on what areas?
So we're looking at the today, so there's first party type of, property. The government is responsible for a lot of the property damage that can happen, so there are liability policies mainly. But there's a lot of future looking. What I was referring to earlier is the stuff that we're looking at today. If you just look at what happened just down the road with Artemis 1, next step in that program, you start to look at very different risk profile. You start to have astronauts on board. You start to look at on a risk basis, there's a lot of things that went into how all of these companies that are interested in participating in space programs for the future, how they're willing to kind of share and collaborate, then what does it look like for the risk side of it? So for us that are insurers, for Jason and myself and Mark, we're looking at it, and also, and for Lamont too, we're looking at, what does that mean for us? How do we envision that? But, the things that are happening today in space aren't so different. Like we're okay, we're sort of understanding what that risk looks like today, and there's plenty of insurance capacity for it. What does that next step and the next step look like? And it's very different. And I think the timelines shift a little bit. I mean, even with Artemis, it looks, I think in 2017 they were saying, the man piece would be in 2019 or 2020. I mean, it's changed, it's shifted, but we are looking at that as an industry. I would say that all the carriers probably have some interest in supporting and participating in different ways. Is that kind of what you were looking for, or more?
And that was good. I have looked at space insurance before, from the perspective of launch.
Yes.
So the very, the various phases of launch, and then also once, for instance, the satellite was reached, local or beyond.
And there's very special insurance products for each one of those phases, or for the satellites themselves,
Right.
and even for performance of those satellites. So there's different pockets of insurance and different carriers that will participate in those programs.
And there's so much that goes into it, like you'll hear of SpaceX or Virgin Orbit or whomever. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of smaller participants in their own independent businesses that contribute to that project, right? So all of those smaller operators as well might fall under some contractual protection from that large operator. But, things we had to get used to, which were ride sharing. I thought that was Uber. Not like ride sharing on a rocket where you buy space to do things like that. So a lot of things have changed, and we've had to look at that in a different dynamic too, not just the launch and Leo and decay and all of that, but what does everything look like contractually with all the other participants as well? So it's a lot. I think there's a lot.
You got a question?
I'm trying to figure out how to format it, but I know you guys keep talking about commercialization of space. So as we start seeing more and more people come on and go in space who are not astronauts, they're not as fit and health-wise, might not be exactly the standards of what an astronaut would be. So how does the insurance for that kind of ride up? I'm assuming you're looking at much higher premiums because of volume liability there. But as we start making space fully commercialized, how do you see the industries going into that?
So I think from that standpoint, we look at it from a criticality of flight. Like, are they active controls? Are they a decision maker? Or are they riding like Jeff Bezos, just kind of going up there and enjoying the fun, right? So I think there's a different risk perspective that we would look at if they were actually manipulating and controlling. Like what Debbie said earlier, this is kind of new ground for us too, as far as space tourism or even third-party liability up in space for bodily injury. So it's a great question, and I think that it's evolving. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we're used to passenger liability, right? We're now starting to think about just a different venue, different application, and it's been limited. So we're now needing to think about, just like, I can't remember who was making the comment earlier, I think it was Bill, about the values and limits and liability going up. When you think about space and exposures related to passengers in space, that is a phenomenal risk profile, and there's going to certainly need to be a lot of industry collaboration around it, just to get us to this point where we're willing to look at astronauts that aren't NASA astronauts and look at that risk profile. This took a lot of discussion as an industry. I mean, I think it's been going on for the last 10 or 12 years.
And sort of with that question, so you said earlier that you guys don't really talk to each other on the table at least. So is there an overseeing insurance agency that controls?
No. Is there an oversight? Is there an association? Yeah, we have an association, but I don't know, call it a drinking club if you would. Get right down to it. Once a year, they always drink.
It'll be next month.
We don't report to anybody. There's not a lot of state oversight. Insurance is regulated by the states. It's not federal. There is, but there's not a lot of oversight by the states. They'd much rather be worried about autos and homes and hurricanes than they would be about somebody's $20 million jet. So for the most part, we kind of keep an eye on each other. And brokers kind of keep them straight, and the underwriters kind of keep us straight. So there's a little bit of, you can't get away with too much. And frankly, it's a little bit more regulated than it was 30 years ago when I got in. Very little regulation. And if you talked 30 years ago, they would have said, oh, all kinds of regulation compared back to the 50s and 60s. Frankly, they're probably not. Your forms and your wording is a little regulated, not too terribly much. But also I'll tell you, your question that you were asking about availability, space liability. I had a customer who called me and he asked me the same question. I said, wow, that's a great question. I have no clue. I made some phone calls to Global and other places. Here's what's happening right now. Bezos and Musk. How much money do they have? All of it. All of it, yeah. They'll write a check. They're not buying it. They're not buying liability insurance right now on those astronauts. Why? They'll just write a check. If you're Musk and you're Bezos, insurance doesn't matter. At some point, what they're saying is dead on. How do we properly price passenger liability insurance on a spacecraft? That, if I was an underwriter, I'd be into that. That to me is way cool. I would love to be on the underwriting side thinking about that. That's the question for the next 20 years. And if you get it wrong, you're out a lot of money.
I got a question, although I will counter that I bet Jeff Bezos' corporate insurance is not thrilled when he shot himself. It's a liability. When he goes with all his money, kaboom is a problem.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Everyone loves the story of the stupidest thing you've ever seen the person do or the dumbest thing you've had to pay out on. No names, no company names. But what is the thing you've had to pay a claim out on and you're like, my God, what were they thinking?
I actually have a funny one that came on our claims report. Like, we get one every Friday. And I just read them because they can be entertaining. And there was a guy, it was really brief, and I didn't really look into it. I just giggled at it. And he has an aircraft, and he was trying to save money on the paint job that he wanted to get. So he decided to sand his own aircraft. And he messed it up, obviously, and had to go get it fixed. But he decided, I'm just confused why you need to save money, sanding an aircraft if you own an aircraft. It just doesn't really make sense. So I giggled at that one, but that was pretty smart.
And then he had a claim on it.
Yeah.
Well, John has some background on this. I used to be an ag underwriter a long time ago for agricultural sprayers. And they're a unique breed of pilot, if you've ever met that one. All day long, what they do is spray crops at a low altitude. They do chandelles and turn back and grow the crops. Well, there was someone sunbathing in their birthday suit in the back of their house. This ag pilot does a handful of turns over the house, right? So the next day at church, everybody knows, right? And there was a claim paid. We classify bodily injury under aviation liability. Mental anguish qualifies as bodily injury. So we wrote a check for that claim. Small town, and word got around, so that's...
Who was injured? The pilot for the looking or the person who was...
The person on the ground. They weren't injured at first, but then when they went to church the next day, that's when...
They got bad.
Debbie, Lamont, you've got a good one?
I'm trying to
I
think.
can't follow that.
I've got one right now, so I'll tell you, it's just the infuriating things. And I won't say who it is and protect the very guilty. We have a client, and this CEO told us, I have no liability because I only deal with foreign military. From our perspective, foreign military is very low liability issues. So they were developing a dipping sonar. Everybody know what dipping sonar is? You're hunting for a submarine, you take a cable down, you want to sit, stop sprung. You drop a $2.5 million unit. It's about yay high, about this big around, and it unfolds once it gets down in the water. And you put that thing down via a cable, and it listens for submarines. So they were developing this for a foreign government, foreign navy, and they got the these development times take years. And over some period of time, they got the drawing numbers mixed up. So they handed to a subcontractor to make the switch and wired a certain way, and then the drawings got mixed up. And so anyway, on the very, very, very first flight, why they needed to be at 4,000 feet in a helicopter, I will never know. But they were flying out to do some testing, and the pilot reached down and he switched it from off to standby. The sonar, which is perfectly normal. And oh, by the way, in case you ever have a problem, there's a guillotine that can slice through the cable instantly. Because every once in a while, if you're really in trouble, you have to get rid of it. Well, what do you think happened? He went to switch to standby, the guillotine went swoop, and this $2.5 million unit went boink. And this is the same client that tells me I have no liability. I don't know why you all are charging me so much for insurance. They're with $2.5 million plus some other ancillary money, because you need to get this thing back. So it's somewhere down the floor, and his first quote to go get it back was $500,000. You know, even though it probably only take somebody in a boat a half a day to find it. So, you know, these things happen. That's sort of why we're in business. Sometimes you smirk. You can't smirk in front of them, but I smirked when I heard this one. And, you know, they happen. We have other stupid things that happen all the time. You know, you all don't remember, but there was a tornado that started on the flight line and went straight down to the Henderson building. Christmas morning of 2007. There wasn't a single airplane on that flight line that wasn't completely torn up. This company wrote a mega check, and it'd be much, much, much bigger today. So things happen. That's why we have a job. Any other questions? Yeah.
What are some of your more common claims that you guys see?
More common are things we see often every week, which is foreign object damage to engines, bird strikes, lightning strikes, hail, weather.
Wind, weather. Airplane was tied out, tornado blew through. You'd be surprised if you were in Prescott a couple years back, a hailstorm came through in July, and every airplane sitting on that ramp was beat to death. Hail was a big one.
One of the areas that doesn't sound all that risky, but ground servicing. You'll have
Yeah.
trucks and people around airplanes, and airplanes are expensive, right? And you could have wide-body airplanes just service for whatever type of service on the ground, and you can find some, you know, pretty extensive damage-type claims, or even injury claims. Things that happen in airports, just your everyday slip and falls kind of things. You know, those are more routine.
Oh, here's one. We insure an FBO. They scratched the Gulfstream's winglet, the piece on the end. They sent it to Gulfstream. Gulfstream charged, now you imagine to fix a Gulfstream is astronomically expensive. The bill from Gulfstream was $12,000. They basically sanded it out and just repainted it. And they wrote a letter that said the aircraft had no structural damage and was cosmetic in nature only. Our FBO damaged it. We will take responsibility. We certainly paid the $12,000. The owner thought that $2.3 million and he'd be happy, because he claimed downtime, loss of value on his aircraft. You know, now he doesn't trust his airplane, so write me a $2.3 million check for $12,000 worth of damage. I'll be happy. So we get those, and those are frustrating. On the brokerage side, it's frustrating. On the underwriting side, it drives you nuts. I promise you, it drives you nuts.
Any other questions?
Maybe I'll ask. So, how much better you are getting with the help of data analytics in terms of forecasting, both probability and stability?
I can only speak from my experience with it, and I think a lot of companies are going this way. But we're getting better with it. It's a lot more actuaries involved in our business these days, and I think a lot of that has to come to aviation is a specialty line of insurance within companies. It often tends to be one of the smallest fish in the pie usually on a P&L when we're looking at a company's offerings. But at the same time, we've struggled from an underwriting perspective. I'm speaking from an underwriting perspective right now about trying to get a profit. So they really, a lot of the C-suites are wanting us to go to more data analytics to try to drive our decisions as opposed to using our gut analysis. So they're getting in there a lot more. It's challenging because it's not like cars. There's only so many aircraft out there. You can't underwrite an aircraft the same way that you would a car and driving and age. We just don't have all that data, but we're getting there. And that's why I mentioned that I think we're going to go more that route in the next 5 or 10 years.
And you guys don't share your data.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't.
I will tell you, Monte Carlo modeling works on very specific type of accounts. If you have the right type of account that has a lot of frequency, Monte Carlo modeling would work. It's the only thing I've seen, unless you really want to get into that super esoteric world, but you can do a little bit of, I've done Monte Carlo modeling on Embry-Riddle, and it predicted that wind losses and hail losses are going to make up a big percentage, and guess what? They just had a multi-million-dollar hail claim. So that works, but it's very tough to model the industry as a whole. Almost doesn't work.
All right, well, thank you all. If they have a few moments, maybe people can stay and chat with you. Thank you all for coming and being part of this and learning from our insurance executives. And I hope to see you tomorrow at our Business of Flight presentation with Ms. Candace Covington, Director of Flight for Adobe. So have a great day.